fine.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Rocket Tranquility, we copy you on the ground.
New possibilities are opening up for scientific cooperation between countries.
1-0. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery, roger. Go for deploy.
Everybody in the shuttle program, the crew is go for launch.
Hothead, nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good evening from Mission Control Houston, and welcome as we get ready for the journey of 4 crew members from on board the International Space Station getting ready to head on home to planet Earth. I'm NASA's Dan Hewitt, coming to you live from the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center. On your camera, you're looking at a Dragon spacecraft. That's not the one we're actually going to be using today, but the crew members will soon be loading into the Dragon dock to the forward port on the International Space Station, loading in and getting ready to come home, and they are part of the NASA's SpaceX Crew 5 mission. They're on board the International Space Station right now getting ready. We don't have views inside quite yet, but we'll soon join them as they're in the final stages of preparing to come home. They're going to be led throughout the flight back by NASA astronaut Nicole Mann. She's going to be wrapping up her first space flight alongside NASA astronaut and Crew 5 pilot Josh Cassada. Filling out the rest of the crew, we have Koichi Wakata from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. He's on the right there. He's the veteran. He actually just passed his 500th cumulative day in space just the other day, getting ready to wrap up another long-duration stay on board the station. And then all the way on the left there, Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina, also wrapping up her first mission. Right now, we're counting down to the next big milestone, and that's going to be closing the hatch on Dragon. So before we get there, a lot of work's been taking place over the last couple of hours. The crew did wake up a few hours ago, and just under an hour ago, they got the go from the teams that weather looked good at their prime splashdown site and at 2 alternates. And that meets our flight rules. We have to have a prime and a backup good to go before we proceed with an undock. So we got past that checkpoint, and we are now heading towards an undocking later this evening. We're expecting the hatch to get closed within the next 15 or 20 minutes. It will take a little bit of time as the crew does, again, get ready to load inside of Dragon. Throughout the morning, they've been installing some of the final cargo on board. They particularly leave some of the powered payloads, the ones that have to be essentially plugged into electrical power to maintain a cold environment until right before they get ready to leave and undock. Also making sure they've cleaned up all of their various items on board the International Space Station, and then packing all their final cargo inside of the capsule itself. Here inside the room, Greg Whitney's leading the flight control team, and we are working in tandem right now with the SpaceX flight control team out at Hawthorne. We're in integrated operations as we're going to continue to be as Dragon departs and moves outside of the keep out sphere and the approach ellipsoid. But again, everything on track so far. We did the final go-no-go for undock just a little while ago. And again, after we got through that weather checkpoint, everything is looking good. So next up is going to be the hatch closed. Before we get there, the crew has to finish essentially suiting up and getting ready to move inside. 2 of our crew members, Josh Cassada and Anna Kikina, are getting suited up on board the space station before they make their way inside. Koichi Wakata and Nicole Mann will be primed for actually getting the hatch closed on the Dragon side. And then once that hatch is closed, they'll be able to get suited up as well. All the crew members are going to be wearing their suits, those white SpaceX spacesuits, during all of the different dynamic phases of the trip home. That essentially encompasses the departure and flight away from the space station. Once they get into essentially a free flight on the way home, they'll be able to get out of their suits, and the crew just goes into an extended off-duty time before they put the suits back on.
ahead.
Hey, just want to let you know, Node 2, Camera 2 is now on.
Okay, we copy, and we'll join you.
And that right there was NASA astronaut Frank Rubio. He's going to be staying on board the station as part of Expedition 69, along with 6 others. But this right here, this is a look inside of Dragon. So we're looking at the seats that they're going to be getting into once they load in the center seat. So in the seat just below our camera, that's where Anna Kikina is going to be sitting. And we're going to just go down the line. After that, you'll have Nicole Mann in the commander seat. Next up, you'll have Josh Cassada, or actually I might have flipped those two. And then all the way on the far side, we're going to have Koichi Wakata. So we're going to start seeing them get into the capsule real soon. Again, 2 of the crew members getting suited up on the station side before they make their way in. And then we'll see Koichi and Nicole Mann get suited up inside Dragon once they get that hatch closed. So there's 2 hatches that have to get closed.
Station on 2 for Dragon tools set up 2.
We're with you.
Yeah, I'm working on the video setup for SSC 27. That is procedure 2.2.204. And I'm currently in step 4.2. The confirm window did not open, so I tried the steps in 4.3, but I do not see any video streams listed in the properties window.
Okay, we copy all. We do need to do some configurations on the ground so we can pick up the setup from here.
Okay, that would be great. And SSC 16 required a reboot, but it should be booting up shortly. And if you can take care of that setup on both SSC 27 and 16, that would be fantastic. Thanks.
We got it. We'll take care of SSC 16 and 27.
So that right there was a little bit of comm between the crew on board and the Capcom here in Houston. So some of the crew members on board, Steve Bowen and Woody Hoberg, are going to be setting up some tools just to help monitor Dragon's departure. They are not prime for any monitoring of that departure itself. The crew on board Dragon are actually the ones that are prime, so they'll be the ones that, if any commands need to be sent or any control needs to happen, that's going to be done by the crew on board, specifically Nicole Mann and Josh Cassada. And there we go, inside Node 2, looking at the hatchway, we can see all 4 of our crew members actually suited up and ready to go. You can see Anna Kikina on the left, and then that's Josh Cassada, Nicole Mann, and then can't see him now, but Koichi Wakata there off to the right. And we've got a total of 11 people on board the space station right now. You've got 3 Russian cosmonauts, Sergei Prokopyev, Dmitry Petelin, and Andrei Fedyaev, along with the recently arrived Crew 6 astronauts, Steve Bowen and Woody Hoberg and Sultan Alniadi, along with Andrei. And so packed house on board. It's been like that ever since Crew 6 arrived. But we're about to go from 11 back down to 7 once Crew 5 departs. 7 generally our steady state crew size on board the space station. We see Anna Kikina starting to make her way across. So again, this is inside Node 2. They're going now through the hatchway, and they're going to go down through what's called the pressurized mating adapter, and then out into the Dragon spacecraft itself. And again, there's going to be 2 hatches that we'll see getting engaged here. There's one on the Dragon itself, and then there's one on the station side inside of that international docking adapter. That's called the A-Pass hatch. They'll affix a docking target to that on the station side, and then get that one closed. And that'll essentially create a space between station and Dragon that we call the vestibule. And before they dock, that's just exposed to the vacuum of space. But before we undock, we have to bring that back down to a vacuum. And so we're going to go through what's called vestibule depressurization. They'll actually open up a valve on the Dragon hatch side that's going to allow the air that's currently in there to escape overboard and just get vented. It's a small amount of atmosphere that just gets vented out into the vacuum of space. And so you bring that vestibule down to essentially vacuum, so you're not having any forceful release of atmosphere, of gas, once you break the seal between the two hatches. And then once that vestibule is fully depressurized, we'll be getting close to the actual undocking. Undocking is scheduled to take place tonight at it's about 0700 GMT, so it'll be 1 a.m. here in Houston, 2 a.m. over on the East Coast. That's when the undocking command will be sent. That is not the undocking time. We'll call undocking once we hit that physical separation, and that'll happen just about 5 minutes later. Dragon undocks from the space station by actually firing some of the Draco thrusters on the spacecraft itself. There are no springs or no physical mechanism that actually separates Dragon from the space station. They'll do an initial, just really short, about 1.5 second long burst of those engines that breaks what's known as stiction. So that's actually the technical term for it. That's those two different metal sides of Dragon and Station that are together for about 6 months. Those thrusters will be able to break them apart, and then Dragon will start to depart. It'll do 2 quick undocking burns. That first one just about 1.5 seconds, and then another one about 5 seconds, and that'll start to increase its rate away from the space station. Dragon then executes a series of departure burns. So over the next couple of minutes, so one about 30 seconds after undocking, and then one about 5 minutes later, and that will start to back Dragon away, then eventually fly it up over top of the space station. And then after about an hour or so, after about an hour, a little less than an hour after we undock, Dragon will do a final departure burn, and that's going to bring it eventually down underneath the space station and allow it to start phasing in front of the station. So as you go into a lower orbit than something else, if you're moving at the same speed, which these two vehicles will be moving relatively at the same orbital velocity, if you're at a lower altitude, you've got less ground to cover to make a circle around planet Earth, so you'll actually start going out in front of whatever's higher than you. And that's what we're talking about when we say phasing in front of something. So that'll be Dragon's eventual path to get below and then out in front of the space station before it goes through some of its final phasing burns to set it up for that deorbit and splashdown. We're looking at about 19 hours from undocking to splashdown, a little less than 19 hours before they splash down off the coast of Florida.
Houston has you loud and clear. I just want to let you know the CG correct photos look great, and so all Crew 5 Dragon cargo actions are complete, and we're also looking good on the undock timeline.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, we had you for a good comm check, 5x5. How us?
We got you the same. One question for you in 2.103, step 3.4. Do we need to swap out the LIO or just unseal?
Copy on 3.4. We're going to have you swap to LIO cartridge 2. How copy?
Okay, we'll swap to LIO cartridge 2.
All right, so we just heard a couple of things there. First, they were talking about CG, that center of gravity. One of the last things that we do before Dragon departs from the space station, once we've packed all of that cargo on board, we have to keep in mind that that's several hundred pounds of cargo that's coming back with the crew, and we have to essentially take into account how that's going to alter the spacecraft's center of gravity, kind of what its heaviest point is, because that will impact actually what your descent profile looks like. And so we want to make sure we have a known center of gravity before we depart and send the crew home. So they take a lot of pictures, compare that with experts down here on the ground, and all of that work has been wrapped up. And again, they just essentially called up and said, pictures look good, and here you can see that cargo. Another item that we heard called up is swapping over to a LiO canister. LiO is lithium hydroxide, and that is what the Dragon spacecraft uses to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere inside of the capsule. While we're docked to the space station, we can actually take advantage of station systems, which have the power. They're regenerative systems, so they don't have essentially a very finite amount that they can scrub from the atmosphere, and they're able to handle a much larger stack. So while Dragon's docked, we're just moving its atmosphere with stations and using the station systems to scrub that CO2. While Dragon's flying free, though, and it's its own sealed off environment, it has to have a CO2 scrubbing capability, and they use LiO cartridges. It just uses a chemical process where you have lithium hydroxide and moisture and carbon dioxide, and that helps to form a precipitate, so that carbon dioxide essentially gets captured. It gets turned into an actual material that gets trapped inside of those cartridges. They have a finite amount, but you have several cartridges on board.
Step 2.10, Dragon configuration is complete for departure.
We copy you, Dragon, and you are go for Section 3 of 2.103, and I'm going to have you pick up on the crew displays in the hatch closed event detail.
Copy, go for step 3 and hatch closed event detail. Thanks.
You got it?
So right there we heard Josh Cassada speaking with the core, the crew operations and resources engineer, essentially the Capcom, over in Hawthorne at MCCX. That's who they're going to be talking to throughout their flight home. You'll hear things referred to as the big loop. So we use a couple of different communications channels to talk to both Dragon and to the space station. This is another quick look. You see Koichi Wakata. That's a LiO cartridge that they're installing. That's what's going to be used to scrub that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They've got a couple of these cartridges, and you've got plenty of margin to accommodate a flight home. But you're going to hear things called the big loop. We have a couple of different comm channels that we use to talk to the station, to talk to Dragon. For the space station, they're called Space to Grounds. We've got 1 through 4, and then Dragon, they're called Dragon to Grounds 1 and 2. And when Dragon is in proximity operations with the space station, we tie all of those together into what's called the big loop. That way, when you're talking on one loop, everybody can hear, and we're going to leave it in that configuration until Dragon's outside of those proximity operations, and it'll be on its way home, and then things will split apart. Dragon will get talked to on Dragon to Ground, and the space station all on Space to Grounds. But again, right now the crew's just doing some of the final cabin configuration before we get ready to actually start closing those hatches. And again, we have 2. We've got one on the Dragon side that's going to get closed from inside Dragon, likely by either Nicole Mann or Koichi Wakata. As Josh Cassada is already seated, he's working to get the displays up. So on Dragon, all of your primary controls are done through touchscreen displays that are positioned right in front of the commander and the pilot seats. They're accompanied by a bunch of hardwired buttons as well for some of the really critical commands that you could send to the spacecraft, as well as a hand controller on the armrest of those seats that helps them communicate. You can see umbilicals plugged into the legs of the seats. So they have umbilicals that go into the suits that integrate them with the seat and with the spacecraft itself. That is able to provide them with some comm hardline, as well as all of the fluid lines, essentially for pressurization or airflow into those suits. They're able to turn on what's called a suit fan to actually just cycle cabin air through the suits. That's not having the suit pressurized. That's just essentially cycling cooled air through the suits to help keep them cool while they're suited up. We also have nitrox on board of Dragon that, if they need to, they can close the visors, suits fully zipped up, and they can actually pressurize. We do a lot of leak checks throughout all of the different operations. We'll do leak checks before they depart. And in that sense, we're actually pressurizing the suits and using that nitrox, and that's to basically offer another line of defense to the crew members if they're ever in something like a cabin depressurization or something leaking into the atmosphere. You're able to essentially isolate the astronauts inside of those suits from the rest of the cabin atmosphere. So just another layer of safety built in to help keep the crew safe on their flight home. So they're still wrapping up the LiO cartridge install, and then we'll start to see the hatches get closed. We'll have the hatch on the Dragon side close first, and then the team on board the space station will work to close that A-pass hatch. That's the hatch in Node 2. You can see actually somebody down. I think that might be Woody Hoberg or Steve Bowen down there right now. They're going to be closing the A-pass hatch. On the station side, first they affix what's called a docking target. It's essentially a big piece of metal that looks like a target. If you've ever seen the centerline cameras for docking, you're familiar with. It's generally a black target with some white lines on it. They take it off while the hatch is opened, just because it basically becomes a hazard where you might bump your head into it. While we're actually docked to the space station, but once we get ready to undock, they reaffix that docking target, and that's just another piece that's used to help guide spacecraft as they're flying in. So that'll get reaffixed before the A-pass hatch gets closed, and then we'll move into that vestibule depressurization. So that, again, that's opening up a valve on the Dragon hatch that's going to essentially allow that atmosphere to just vent overboard into the vacuum of space. That'll bring the vestibule, that space between the Dragon hatch and the station hatch, down to vacuum, and that'll get us ready for that undocking. And just to recap, our undocking is targeted at right about 1:05 a.m. Central Time at 7:05 GMT. They'll send an undocking command about 5 minutes before that, so right at the top of the hour. And we do have a window to execute this undocking. We've got about an hour window to send that undocking command and still meet our timeline to hit the descent and the target to come home. But essentially what happens is they'll send an undocking command, and that triggers a couple of different things that have to happen. There are two umbilicals. There are two umbilicals that are going to retract. They're currently connected right now. They're supplying power and data between Dragon and station. So Dragon, while it's docked, not only able to utilize station's atmosphere mixing, but also able to draw power from the station systems and use its communication arrays, antennas for data and telemetry. So those two umbilicals have to retract and back away, and then we have to unhook Dragon. So there are 12 hooks that currently hold Dragon in place. They've been in place now for more than 150 days, and those what secure the Dragon spacecraft to that international docking adapter. There's 12 in total. They move in two different sets of 6. So after those umbilicals have retracted, they'll start opening the hooks on set number 1. Once those first set of hooks are open and the second one start driving, we are committed to an undocking.
On the big loop, LiO is configured at 0523.
Dragon, we copy LiO configured at 0523. Thanks.
And the crew calling down, they've got that LiO, that lithium hydroxide canister installed. Again, that's what's going to be scrubbing CO2 from the atmosphere of Dragon while it's in free flight. But again, so we'll send the undocking command, umbilicals retract, and then 12 hooks in two different sets of 6. And then as soon as all of those hooks are open, Dragon autonomously executes an undocking burn. This is using the Draco thrusters around the service section, kind of the lower part of the capsule, not on the trunk, but still on the Dragon capsule, firing them for just 1.5 seconds, so just a really quick burst, and that's what actually physically separates Dragon from the International Space Station, and that's what we'll call undocking. They do 2 burns pretty much right on top of each other. They do that first one really quickly, and then about a 5-second burn following that. And that'll start Dragon backing away very slowly, usually just a little over 1/10 of a meter per second, backing away from the International Space Station. And then it sets up to do a series of departure burns. So that's what's going to essentially back it even farther away and then eventually change its trajectory to bring it up and above and eventually behind. And then after one final departure burn, sending it beneath the orbit of the space station, allowing it to start to phase in front of it, essentially move in front of it on an orbital path, and then send it on its journey home. Right now, though, we are just standing by for the hatch closure with the LiO canister installed, the lithium hydroxide. That's one of the major steps we were waiting for. And then we'll see the crew get the final steps completed and get the hatch closed. Before they do that, they do a quick inspection of the vestibule on that international docking adapter, again, just to make sure that we don't see any debris, anything like that. And then they'll be ready to start closing the hatch. And again, we've got 2. We've got one in Dragon, one on the station side. That one's called the APAS hatch, and we'll see those close shortly. And here's our look inside. You can see Josh Cassada in the pilot seat, Nicole Mann getting into the commander seat. So your commander and your pilot, they're primed for essentially doing any maneuvers, sending any commands that you need to throughout Dragon. Your 2 mission specialists that are flanking them are just helping them monitor. Everyone's essentially looking at data from the Dragon systems as it's in flight. But if you do any actual manual piloting, that's from your 2 folks in the middle, Nicole Mann and Josh Cassada, and that's something they train for. They train through different contingencies and scenarios where if anything were to fail or anything not to track, they are able to take manual control and do piloting. But otherwise, Dragon flies completely autonomously. It will essentially do all of its burns to undock and depart.
You on the big loop.
We made an earlier call to SpaceX that the forward hatch is closed. Not sure if you guys copied that.
And Dragon, we did not copy that, but we copy it now. Dragon Endurance hatch is closed. We've got a command to send here, and you should see the flight computer state progress to hatch closed imminently.
Okay, we'll stand by for that, and then we'll check the PPRD ISO valve. And just a heads up, it seems like we were out of comm there for probably 2 minutes or so.
Okay, copy. Yeah, 2 to 3 minute unexpected loss of comm, and that was unexpected. We copy.
Dragon copy.
All right, and from that conversation right there, we heard confirmation that the Dragon Endurance hatch is closed. So that hatch close coming right at about 11:29 p.m. Central Time, 12:29 p.m. Eastern, getting us one step closer to NASA SpaceX Crew 5 coming on home. So with that hatch closed, we're going to see the A-pass hatch get closed next. And then they're going to open an isolation valve on the Dragon hatch side. That's going to start venting that atmosphere that's currently in the vestibule, that space between Dragon and station overboard, bringing it down to vacuum and getting us close to an undocking. We are targeting undock today at 1:05 a.m. Central Time, so in just a little over an hour and a half from now. Before we get there, we'll do the vestibule depress, leak checks on the hatch, before we get ready to depart. So 1:05 a.m. Central Time, 2:05 a.m. Eastern, that's 7:05 GMT. We're looking for Dragon to undock. Once we undock, we'll do a series of departure burns, bringing Dragon away from the International Space Station, eventually moving it out beneath and in front of it, getting it ready for the journey home. It's going to be about 19 hours from undock command until splashdown. We're looking at a splashdown tomorrow night, or tonight, depending on where you are, at about 8:02 p.m. Central Time, 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 2:02 in the morning on Sunday for GMT. But it'll be about a 19-hour trip from undocking all the way to splashdown off the coast of Florida for the Crew 5 astronauts and cosmonaut. While they fly, they'll essentially be in an off-duty phase where they'll just be able to get out of their suits, just monitor Dragon systems and relax before they essentially take the plunge back through the Earth's atmosphere, splash down where we're going to have recovery teams on a recovery ship ready to get them out of the water and then get them home pretty quickly. All right, well, with the hatch closed, that's going to wrap up our first piece of coverage for this evening. We are going to be back with you before we get ready to undock. We'll be joined by the team out at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne. We're going to help us take you through the next steps of the journey for Crew 5 to come home. And then as we did on the way uphill, we're going to be with them on our mission audio stream, and you'll be able to listen to the crew all the way. And we'll be obviously showing you their descent and landing live tomorrow night. So everything proceeding smoothly so far for an undock tonight. We're going to go ahead and sign off for now. We'll be back in just about an hour or so tune back in and get ready to say farewell to the space station with Crew 5. For now, we'll sign off. This is Mission Control Houston.